Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Joe Davich, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Georgia Center for the Book. On behalf of the Georgia Center for the Book, DeKalb County Public Library, and the DeKalb Library Foundation, welcome to another in our continuing series of virtual author events. If you would like to purchase a copy of the book this evening, How We Can Win, Race, History, and Changing the Money Game That's Rigged, we will drop an order link for you in the chat section. Our little shop of stories here in Decatur is the bookseller this evening. I am pleased to say that Kim will be at Little Shop of Stories tomorrow signing books. So if you would like a signed copy, please order using the link. And if you would like the book personalized either to you or to someone, you can indicate that by using the notes section of the order page. We will have an opportunity for Q&A after we finish our formal presentation this evening. So if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature. That helps us keep track of the questions a little better than just in the chat section. You can find the Q&A button at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on your device. We've also turned on live transcriptions this evening for those attendees who are hearing impaired. And if you need to modify the font and make it larger, please find the CC button at the top or the bottom of your screen, and you can adjust that there. So right now, I would like to get to our program and introduce our author this evening. Of course, we all know of her book and viral video, How We Can Win. The video, of course, became a YouTube sensation in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder. And she has been on many, many talk shows because of it, including Trevor Noah and Steve Harvey. Kim Jones is the host of the Atlanta chapter of the Royal Red Black Girl Book Club. She is the co-creator of the YATL Young Adult Reading Program that many of you attended at the Decatur Library. She, of course, is also a best-selling author of I'm Not Dying With You Tonight and the follow-up, Why We Fly. I'm Not Dying With You Tonight was, of course, on the list of books all young Georgians should read. And I'm very, very pleased to say, and giving you all a sneak peek, that Why We Fly by Kimberly Jones and Geely Siegel will be on our new list of books all Georgians should read that will debut on January 28th. She is, of course, a mother, an author, a director, and an activist, and I am so pleased to call her a friend as well. So will you all please join me to make welcome this evening, Kimberly Jones. Kimberly?
Oh my goodness. First of all, I am so excited to be doing this event with you, Joe. Joe and I go back over a decade, our friendship, and we'll talk more about that later. But what the Centers for the Book do nationally for the conversation around literature is actually amazing. And so I'm glad to be participating in an event with Georgia Center for the Book. So I wanted to read a little bit from one of my favorite sections of the book and then talk about it a little bit. And then Joe will join me back and we'll have a chat. And so this is from one of the last chapters in the book. And this chapter is called Hope Looks Like the Future. So I'm just going to read a little bit of Hope Looks Like the Future. Allyship makes me think of linking up with your favorite cousins at grandma's house. When a fight erupts over toys, at least 3 kids run to rat to grandma, who then shares lessons on diplomacy. Everyone is prepared to push through the evening because, above all, everyone wants to see the cousins have a good time and enjoy themselves. It's about facing what happens without failing to learn. This doesn't mean inequities don't exist among the cousins. One may live with grandma because of a non-functioning parent, a pain point. But in this house, they have the privilege because it's their room and their toys. They can dictate the rules negotiated with grandma for their benefit. We all have things that set us back. We all have some measure of power. The greatest allies make me think of the best cousins, the ones who share, offer snacks, and go grab the shy cousin who is sitting alone and convince them to play. Allies correct the misbehaving cousin while at the same time offering them a road to redemption. This is work everyone can do, and everyone should. It's because of the best cousin's care that 20 years later, the whole family is still sitting together at reunions and weddings, not because they all have the perfect relationships, but because they know how to work together. Their intent is continually showcased in their actions. But what are white allies doing about the fact that Black people are still dying at police hands and qualified immunity is protecting these police? Breonna Taylor was killed in her sleep by police, and those police are going to work each day and home with their families every night. A majority of US states are trying to disenfranchise voters of color after the 2020 election. Where is white outrage? If the disenfranchisement succeeds, it will be a betrayal of the core values of the Constitution. Who gets to say they love this country if they are willing to watch it sell itself out? And for what? To keep the people who built this country from having a say about its future? Look in the mirror. Who are you? What are you willing to stand for? I would love to see you on the front line, standing with us for equity and the value of our lives. I'm also a practical woman. I urge white allies to put their money where their mouths are. There is a lot of work to be done and plenty of good organizations working. If you say you don't have time to join them, contribute. Now that you understand how you benefit from systems that guaranteed your access to resources, give some back. Among ourselves and for ourselves, we have a lot of work to do. We have to build trust when so many American systems have been built to divide and conquer us. White people make distinctions of class because there are distinctive differences. However, we also know that it doesn't matter how elite the school you went to was, no taxi driver will stop for you, and you can be killed anytime, anywhere, because of the color of your skin. Let's understand that if you were at the expense of school, we need your voice and access. If your underfunded public school has terrible teachers and you barely graduated, we need your creativity and survival skills because you wouldn't have made it this far without having plenty. Our road is together, and we have to find better ways to see and include each other. We have to meet our sisters and brothers where they are and welcome whatever they have to offer. As I think about our activist future, I worry about the culture. It's becoming a cancer in our movements. The people who lead in the movement space are not messiahs. We are all just humans trying to do the work that's important to us. It's an offering to our community. We hope we get it right. We may get it wrong. That's how it goes with humans. We are all flawed. And if you dig deep enough or come with enough judgment, it will always be easy to find a reason to drag any one of us. But why? My worry is that we are creating a climate in which people won't come forward to offer their best on behalf of us, all because they're worried about being exposed as being flawed in any of the multitude of ways humans are. We can't elevate people's flaws above their work. We can't. Between us, it's time to speak the truth, not to win or be right, but in hopes that the truth will be the foundation for resolution. I wanted to read that section because although I deal with a lot of really harsh realities and unfortunate truths that people find very difficult to face, I hope that I ended it in a way that made people feel hopeful, because without hope, we won't feel the purpose and the point in going on. And I want people to understand that the power really is amongst the people. The people really have the power to make a change. And we do a disservice to those who came before us, who fought for women's rights, for LGBTQIA rights, for Black rights, for Asian rights, for Jewish rights, to say that we are still in the same place. We are not still in the same place. There has been growth. Is there tons of work to do? Oh, dear God, yes, there's tons of work to do. But we have to honor the work that has been done, because what it does is give us a roadmap to knowing that 50 years from now, if we are reawakened, there can be change. The same way, if you awaken someone from 50 years ago, I guarantee you what they will see is change.
Well, thank you so much, Kim. And, of course, I tore through my copy of it, and, reading it, it's part history, part memoir, part manifesto, but it's all beautifully woven together. And I learned a lot about Black history, Kim history, and it gave me a lot of things to really think about. And I think one of the things that, maybe we could start off our conversation with is talking about the importance of books and reading in your life, because, peppered through the book, there are great epigraphs from James Baldwin. And you mentioned so many books, and there's a great section in the back of the book for further reading that has some really strong, what I would call canon literature for activism, for civil rights back there. So let's talk a little bit about Kim history and your sort of like literary journey.
Yeah. So it's like, I'm the baby of 7 kids. And so, my mom had to find things that we were all passionate about, her and my dad, to like programming for us and all kinds of things, especially growing up on the South Side of Chicago, to keep us busy. And so for me, I could easily be pacified by being dropped off at the library. Carter G. Woodson Library, which was the library up the street from my house, I was on a first name basis when I was 10, 11, 12 years old with the librarians there, because on Saturday morning, that's where I would be when my mom did her shopping, because I'm the youngest. So the older ones would be doing whatever they were doing. And she would, drop me off at the library, and I'd tool around, and they have an expansive and beautiful African-American studies section. And they're actually famous for their African-American studies section at that library. And so I was blessed that that was my neighborhood library, and I would just go there and learn so much. And the cool thing about it was I went throughout my entire academic career undiagnosed with ADHD. And I had this amazing teacher in 7th and 8th grade, Miss Carolyn Lumpkin, who, when I would get, busy, if you will, and get restless in my seat, and she knew I just needed to burn a little energy or talk or do something, she would say, "Kim, do you have a lesson you want to teach?" And I would get up and teach a 30-minute, basically critical race theory class or Black history class when I was in 7th and 8th grade. And it was because of all of this information that I was getting from my Saturday mornings at Carter G. Woodson Library. And so, the first time I remember seeing myself really reflected on the page was in the book Man-Child and the Promised Land. And then I just had this hunger to find more, but there definitely wasn't more, especially not back then in YA. YA really wasn't even really a thing back then. And I mean, we had Judy Blume, and, you kind of went from babysitters clubs to adult books. And so I had to find myself in the pages of Baldwin and Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes, and, Sonia Sanchez and Nikki Giovanni and people like that. So I was reading these adult tales at 13 years old after finding Man-Child. And Man-Child was dope because even though it was an adult book, the protagonist was a teen. So it wasn't YA, but it felt YA-ish, you know what I mean? And so it just really, it's really now, and I try to reflect this in the book, like, man, what a setup for my life that was. Unknowingly, a setup for my life was this driven passion for books, which would eventually, lead me to Little Shop of Stories, which led me on my publishing journey.
And I think there are a lot of us who remember you, Indicator, working at Little Shop of Stories. Because I mean, you were infectious. I mean, you walked into that. I mean, Little Shop of Stories is a great local indie children's bookstore. I've always said that you can't walk into that place and not want to buy children's books. It is just adorable and sweet, and they staff it really well. But you were definitely the show ever I walked into Little Shop of Stories. It was the Kim show and everybody else. But I do have to say, you know, when we used to do the letters about literature, and I used to give the gift certificates to the prize winners and then walk them over, you were the one of the booksellers who always would help shop too with the students when they were over there. And I think they really appreciated that kind of attention too.
Yeah.
But you know, at the same time, I also felt they were getting a huge lesson from Miss Kim while they were over there at the same time.
Yeah, it's like, you know, the beauty of having worked at Little Shop is like, first of all, Dave and Diane, the owners of the shop, just kind of let me like run amok. They were like that 7th and 8th grade teacher that I had. They just like, in the most inspiring and positive way, just kind of gave not only myself, but really all of the staff there. You know, you have people who had degrees from like Dartmouth who were like working at Little Shop. And so it was people who really were passionate about the community, passionate about literature, passionate about books, passionate about kids, and that connection between kids and books. And so, you know, Dave and Diane, if it was within reason, they let us create all kinds of community programming, and we supported each other in that. And so, you know, I tell Dave this, I think he thinks I'm making it up. I have the way that my brain works because I'm neurodivergent. I was terrible at jobs. I was like, every job that I had, if I didn't get fired, I probably should have been fired. You know what I mean? Because I was just awful at it. Little Shop was the first time that I found my people and that I found my place and that I had a job that I was like really, at least I felt that I was like really good at it and felt empowered to go there. And part of that was not only just Little Shop, but partners like you at the Georgia Center for the Book, partners at the Decatur Education Foundation, partners like that. And then Dave and Diane really just allowing me to create space for the community. You know, I was able to do diversity programs there at the shop. You know, Tara and I created a theater troupe, but then eventually Hannah picked up and, you know, we do performances, and like, this was all free to the kids. So Little Shop served not only as a bookstore, but low key an after community center. People leave their kids there with us and then call from the outside and into the shop and say, hey, is Joni there? Send them outside, and know that we were a safe space. And especially when we had programs like yours, and we bring kids over, you know, the passion of the people who work there, myself included, like, we get excited about putting the right book in a kid's hand because we know what that does. And we know how many kids need that. They need that escapism. They need that personal touch, that personal attention. They need to see themselves reflected on the page. They need to learn about other communities, cultures, and lived experiences by seeing it on the page, because that nurtures empathy in them for people who are different from them. And so I took that job very serious, very serious.
Well, and you know, I've always said that reading is such a personal thing too, because, you know, like you say, when they see it on the page, it's like, it's like direct upload. You're getting that thought, that idea directly communicated to you from the author.
Yeah.
And it's like, there are books that you have that instantaneous affinity for, that unbelievable connection. And, you know, I know folks like to steer people to books, but, you know, sometimes they just find you at the right moment. There's that literary kismet where that, you know, one phrase on that one page speaks to you in a way that, you know, books can be very entertaining and you can enjoy them, but it's like, there is that moment where you go, aha.
Yeah.
But speaking of it, and, you know, in reading your book too, I didn't know, and I was very, very interested when I found out about how you got the job at Little Shop of Stories, because when you speak about economics and systemic racism and the problem with the system that Black people are forced to live in, especially when they are poor, was something that you know very intimately.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's in the book, but how did you decide to approach the interview and walking into Little Shop of Stories to get that job?
Well, the funny part about it is, I didn't grow up living in poverty. I lived in a neighborhood in Chicago that was surrounded by poverty. The section of my neighborhood was like working class families, but I was not unaffected by the trauma of my community because we were boxed in. It was like a 10-block radius that was like working class families. I grew up in a 2-parent home, but we were boxed in by neighborhoods that were overrun by gang violence and really the crack epidemic, the cocaine epidemic of the 80s and the 90s, and everything that happened when I had several schoolmates and classmates that when we were in high school, they were murdered and I had to go to their funerals. I witnessed the murder when I was 15 years old. I talk about that in the book. And so, but I had my little safe cove, but I did not go unscathed. But my parents never had real economic hardship. They were both working. I don't, it's not, my parents would come back and haunt me from the grave if I told, the hood tale of like, we didn't have hot water. And it's like, that's not true. They're like, girl, don't you tell these people these lies trying to sell no book. We had hot water. But then I experienced that as an adult, as a parent, which was devastating. And I think not only is that, reflective of some of the economic disparities of the Black community, but I think it's reflective of our generation. Gen X struggled economically. Our financial systems did not look like the boomers. And I think it got even worse with the millennials. You know what I mean? And I'm hoping we're working towards trying to make a come around for the Zers before they have the same lived experience. But like things that were just commonplace for the boomers and everybody before them, our generations, the Gen X and millennials, we have not had the same road that everyone else did, especially when it comes to, and the numbers reflected in terms of home ownership and all types of things. We're buying homes a lot later in life and that kind of thing. And so I struggled a great deal. And I'd like to fancy myself an intelligent and smart person. But despite that, I still struggled. And so I experienced extreme poverty as an adult, as a young adult. And unfortunately, around the time in which I became a mom. And so I lived for years in a house that didn't even have gas. And so I would have to like warm water on the stove and stuff like that to bathe my son and I. And there's a humiliation comes with that level of poverty, especially coming from having lived in a working class family where this was not the norm with me. I was completely humiliated and didn't want to share that information or that experience with anybody. And so I had really fallen on hard times and was unemployed. I had been working as a production secretary in the TV and film industry. And when my son would go, we worked 12-hour days. And so when I would leave the house, my son would be asleep. And when I would come home, my son would be asleep. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. And so I left work and then had a little money saved. And over some time, I got to the point where I had depleted that money and I was just flat broke. Like I just didn't have anything. I was trying to get a job. I was flat broke. And so I went down to apply for TANF, which is basically like welfare. I went down and I applied for TANF. And in Georgia, when you apply for TANF, you have to enroll in order to receive TANF. Before you even receive it, you have to enroll in a career readiness class. And so they don't do much. It's not very productive. I would love to talk to the state over there about the TANF program because it doesn't really help you. All you do is sit in a room all day while people try to teach you how to make a resume. And then you do that for like a week. And then after that, they start sending you out to job hunts. And you have to show proof of this job hunt for a certain amount of time before they'll give you your first check. Well, part of what you have to do to prove it is as you are going out hunting for these jobs, you have a paper, a form that has to be filled out that said you're applying for jobs. Well, like who's gonna hire you if you've got this like TANF form that has to be like filled out and signed and all of this stuff saying you're applying for the job? And then it's like, it's such a humiliating process to have to do that. And so I had been out looking for jobs, filling in my TANF paperwork, and I ran across Little Shop of Stories. And as a book lover, my head popped off. Like my head completely popped off. And so I went in and I applied for the job, but what I didn't do was give them my TANF form. Of all the jobs that I had applied for, I did not give them that form. I did not want them to know that that form existed in the world. I thought it was the humiliation of it all. I thought it would reflect poorly on me. I thought it would prevent me from getting the job. So I took my chance on that one and was like, I'll go get stuff filled out at other places, but I'm not giving them this form. And I didn't. And they called me the next day for a job interview. Now I had applied to all these other places for over a week and then get one phone call, one nothing. And they called me the next day for a job interview. And then I started the next week. And at this time, right? So maybe the first month that I'm still working at Little Shop, I'm still living in a house with no gas. And it's so expensive and embarrassing. And the way in which people who provide services for you treat you, the lack of humanity. I don't understand this notion that people think everyone just wants to sit on welfare and be on welfare forever, because the process of receiving services is so dehumanizing. It's so ridiculously dehumanizing. It is not something that people just choose to continually do to themselves. And so I got blessed that I got this job at Little Shop, and it paid better than jobs that I had been paid before. And it allowed me after a month to kind of get on my feet, to get the gas cut on, to get in a better position, to have free reins, to get all these advanced reader copies of books that I could read. And it really was a turning point, a very positive turning point in my life.
And one of the things that you did mention in the book, and you just flat out say it's expensive to be broke.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what happens, is that you do have so much of that stuff to carry. And it's not only just you not having money, you have to invest so much of your time with this as well. And everybody always uses that old phrase, time is money. And it's like, here you are sitting for hours doing things that really isn't productive. And you could, there are ways to help people move forward without having them sit in room. It's like, like you said, you fancy yourself an intelligent person. You probably could have written a resume in a day.
Exactly.
And been out trying to do something else. And speaking of, don't forget, y'all, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and we can start getting those questions asked to Kimberly as well. But there is a lot of research into economics, and specifically economics in the Black community, in your book as well. And you talk about the civil rights movement and so many of those other historical events, in particular Black communities, that until the past few years, and you talk about it being related to the pandemic, that all of a sudden these became the focus. People really started talking about Tulsa in the past few years. But you talk about so many other communities, and I think sometimes too, as Georgians, we forget that there is also a community that was flooded to create Lake Lanier.
Yeah.
And I found that very, very fascinating, that all of this research that you put into this to try and help people build their communities and build their personal wealth too.
Yeah. Yeah. And because I think that's part of why I wanted to start off talking about allyship, because I do mention in the book, one of my coworkers at Little Shop of Stories, Krista Gilliam, her husband, Thad, who is a financial planner, took some time out of his schedule, literally just because, for no reason other than just to be nice, and gave me free financial services and helped me get myself on track, and helped me and taught me really a lot about what I know about personal finance, and what has helped me to grow my portfolio and become financially stable was Thad just really taking old Thaddeus Gilliam, is taking the time out to get my whole financial portfolio on track. Like, he helped me set up a 529 for my son's college fund and get life insurance and create banking systems that will help me save and show me how to invest my money, and like just really gave me all of this knowledge for free, none other than just like, I want to see you do well. And like, this is what I do. And I know what it costs. And I know you're a bookseller and don't have a ton of money, but I could teach you how to manage the money that you have and how to make the money that you have work. You know, people forget that when you're talking about the economic disenfranchisement of people of color, that you also have to recognize that what also was lost in that was intellectual collateral. So if an entire group of people are disenfranchised the way in which we were with like the Freedmen's Bank, for example, which I talk about, which lots of people don't know about, that Black people lost to the tune of, you know, if you set it for inflation, something around $60 million through the bad investments of the owners of the Freedmen's Bank, which was the only place that Black people could bank at the time. When you talk about that, not only do you lose the actual finance, but you lose the intellectual collateral of people knowing how to process and handle and manage money that gets passed down generationally. So that also gets lost with it. That gets lost included with it. There's a section in my book where I talk about how Black people held an extreme amount of patents during Reconstruction, which was kind of the golden era of like Black growth, which is where Tulsa and all these things, Seneca Village and all these places fall into play. The amount of patents that were owned by Black people that, due to Klan abuse and unaccountability at the patent office and stuff like that, it kind of turned people off to try to even basically invent, because they would be brutalized for it. So think about those systems. First of all, think about the wealth that's lost from the inventions, and then think about, again, the intellectual influence of these Black inventors, having Black children around them growing up and seeing that and letting that just be part for the course of part of their life. And so when we talk about the full gamut of the economic loss, it's like, unless you have the full view, which I don't even think I was capable of giving the full view in this book. It's the highlights, really, and it's a lot of information packed into a little book, but it's the highlights. It's like, this is why we all have to just like cut it out and get outside of ourselves and take a minute and consume the information. Not because you're trying to, and this is why I said what I said at the end of my speech when I said, and they are lucky that what Black people are looking for is equality and not revenge. I think that's the fear, that if you empathize with this massive struggle that Black people have faced, that they will then turn around and in turn do to everyone else what has been done to us. And we have never showcased that. That is propaganda. We have never showcased that. All we have ever showcased is a desire, really almost to just be left alone and be free to just be. But it becomes the reason why I thought economics was a very important scope and way to handle the conversation, because it's so easy to beat a man when he's starving.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you touched on the economic point right away in the book, because you plainly say that Black Americans were brought here for white economic prosperity. Yeah. Paraphrase. It's like and that's it. Yeah. That Africans were enslaved, brought to our shores for white men to build their own personal wealth. Yeah. And it runs through the book that you tie everything up so well, even toward the end of the book, when you're talking about, the 13th Amendment, where, a Black person accused of a crime could get pressed back into slavery and then taking it through the Jim Crow South. I mean, this is, shades of Slavery by Another Name by Douglas Blackman, is that it still continue, you know, Reconstruction, when everybody was sold that bill of goods, you know, thinking that this was going to be the end and everyone was going to have a brighter future. And then it didn't happen because of Jim Crow laws and things like that. And, you know, even incarcerated Blacks were treated terribly, you know, and it was just it was institutionalized slavery. I mean, it passed it from the plantation to the prison system. And it was just continued victimization. And we continue to see it today. I mean, you know, gerrymandering, I mean, we keep turning in these redistricting maps. And you know, I mean,
on that.
well, I almost, it's one of those things that, you know, it's from a propaganda perspective. You see these people wanting to pick this fight that I hope that a larger percentage of us can look at and say, this was always wrong and is still wrong.
Yeah.
Why do you want to perpetuate these stereotypes? It just doesn't make sense in 2021.
It doesn't. It's like, even when you think about this CRT fight, right? Here's the part that I find hilarious about that fight. First of all, the tenets of CRT are not even taught until college. There has never been a school on the face of the planet that has taught, well, of the American planet, that has taught critical race theory in schools. Critical race theory is not introduced until college. The tenets of critical race theory, if you actually know what the tenets of critical race theory are, they're not taught in schools. What is taught in schools is Black history. That is not CRT. They are not one and the same. But if you convince people that CRT and Black history are one and the same, which is just propaganda, and which is what is going on right now, you set up the ability to remove the already limited Black history that's even taught. And the funny thing is, you know, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this. It's like even comical that you call it Black history because it's American history. And so, you know, you can't have pieces of America that are interesting to you, that make you feel comfortable, and then pieces that are not, and that is what you teach. Because again, I mean, I've been talking to people who are wildly intelligent, Harvard graduates, the smartest of the smarty of the smartest pants, and the amount of information in my little book that's the equivalent of a TED Talk that they didn't know, that is news to them. I mean, people text me all the time, like the watermelon thing blew their mind. And so it's like CRT isn't being taught, it was never taught. What's being taught is a very limited edition of Black history, and now propaganda has figured out a way to even mute that. And it's like, first of all, I saw a meme, I love memes. I saw a meme the other day that made me so happy, I posted it like 5 times in a row. It said, the people who threw rocks at Ruby Bridges don't want their grandkids to know that they threw rocks at Ruby Bridges. And that's what it is.
It's like, well, I mean, and people always post those just vitriolic pictures of those white women, just, you know, with such anger and hatred in their faces. Like, you know, there's probably a lot, you know, somebody's identified these people. You know who you are.
You're still alive.
Yep.
People think all of this, it cracks me up when people are like, why are you talking about stuff that happened so long ago? Slavery happened so long ago. I'm like, Ruby Bridges is in her 60s, not her 90s, not her 80s, not her 70s. Ruby Bridges, who desegregated school, a small child that grown people felt comfortable throwing rocks at, is in her 60s. So what else? Who else do you think is give someone 10 years older than her that was around when that was happening, being awful? They're in their 70s. Some of them are in office.
Well, I mean, you know, it's like Mary Frances Early, who we had, you know, was the first Black graduate of UGA. I mean, that's not that long ago. And you know, it's also sometimes disheartening too. It's like, you know, we always have to use the word first plus something to define something. And it's just like, oh, you know, the first Black graduate of UGA, or, you know, if you're looking at sports, like, you know, Allie Raisman, the first Jewish American woman to win a gold medal. It's like, you know, why is that always a novelty? You know, why do we have to have some kind of you know, defining racial or religious, you know, adjective assigned to everything when someone does something? Can't someone do something and on their own merit, you know, get the adulation from it for doing it, accomplishing something?
I was just saying that the other day. I'm like, and also part of why people do that is because it's reflective. It's interesting. It's interesting because it's reflective of how much those groups have been withheld. So it's like, if you have the first Jewish woman to do those things, you know what I mean? Then it's reflective of the notion that, oh, Jewish people weren't allowed to do these things before, or they were boxed out of doing these things. So if you have the first gay person to blah, 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 it's because, oh, gay people weren't welcome in these spaces before. So, you know, it's like, we should get to the place where people stand on their own merit. That was King's dream, right? But it's like part of why that's still part of the dialect, because it's reflective of the fact of how closed even now some spaces are to people who are different.
All right, folks, Kimberly, I could probably talk for a while, but I'm seeing the little alerts coming up. So we're gonna go and grab a couple of these questions from you all. And thank you, Myra. Also, another YA author in the room, and I always love it when our Georgia authors support our fellow Georgia authors.
Myra, that's my sister, man. I love Myra.
Well, she says, thank you so much for being here, and congratulations to Kim on this exciting book. And she asks, did you discover something about yourself or your views in the process of writing the book that you did not know or realized before you started?
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. You know, it's funny because I talked about the poverty piece, right? I didn't realize how much shame I carried at that time until I started working through that section. Because, and the reason I realized how heavy that shame was, and why now I speak so loudly for the proletariat, if you will, because I want to release that shame. I almost didn't put it in the book because I thought, oh my God, people who actually know me, like my coworkers at Little Shop, you know, things like that, will hear about this kind of like almost like destitute space that I was in when they first met me. And so, and it's like now, you know, I'm, you know, a known author, and it was like, are people going to view me less if I talk about this pain point, which was poverty, and that I couldn't even lean on the notion that this poverty happened in my childhood, so it was something that I'm not responsible for, that this is poverty that happened in my young adulthood. And so therefore I'm forced to take, in a sense, responsibility, because that's what the world tells me, right? That I have to take responsibility for my own actions that led me to that. And I struggled with whether or not I was even going to put that in there. But then I realized that the best thing that I could do for myself was to put it in there and then release the shame, because now it's out there. It's in the world. The world knows. And whether people, it affects the way, and what I realized is that if it did, and I worked this out in therapy for the record, if it did affect the way that people viewed me, that is more a reflection of them than it is me.
Oh, thank you for getting to yeah, Kim and I already agreed there is no crying in bookseller. So no one starts that keeps us on the right path for this evening. So I have two here, one from Dr. Cherry and one from Aaron, and I'm going to go ahead and try to combine them both because they are about CRT. And the one comment was, and teachers are supposed to know CRT only to ensure culturally relevant pedagogy as they teach.
Mhm.
And Aaron asks, can you address the Combating CRT manual and Renew America propaganda website and how we can combat this huge organized right-wing movement? How can we address the lies in a 41-page manifesto effectively and organize the same way, quote, they, end quote, have organized their propaganda and misinformation campaign with a counter campaign or, quote, truth campaign?
Yes. Well, I have lots of answers on that, so thank you. You know, I think that, okay, so first of all, to get into this fight, we are gonna, as a culture, are gonna have to step into a space of emotional maturity, right? So we are going to have to get to a place where we know that we are like kind of at war, if you will, in this thing. And so we have to take some of the emotion out of it and actually just replace that with logic. And what I mean by that is, the first thing we're gonna have to do is understand civics. These groups that put together are virtually grassroots lobbyists. They are not big budget, I'm trying to get a federal bill passed lobbyists. They are grassroots lobbyists who are just really smart and savvy. And so this, to me, is where the intellectual maturity comes in, because people think it's you know, blasphemous for me to call these people smart and savvy. They're smart and savvy. I don't have an emotional attachment to that makes it so that like I'm 5 and I'm like I hate them, so all that I can say is that they're awful and there's no other conversation that I can have. No, in acknowledging that the way in which they are moving and accomplishing their goals, they are smart and savvy. And the reason that why I say that and why we have to do that is because then you can actually pay attention to the chess moves that your opponent is making, because baby, this is chess, not checkers. And so what we have to look at is, okay, how are they getting a lot of this stuff done? Well, this is also where we got to do a better job of teaching civics in school, because we don't really teach it. No, I don't have $1 million. The people like me don't have $1 million. But what I do know is, just like HB 531, which was that awful voting rights bill that was passed here in Georgia, what happened was one group of people in a city or a state got organized and put together what they thought was going to be a good voting rights bill. And they matched it up to the laws of the Constitution in their state. And they put it on the docket. They made relationships with their state reps. So we always want to fight at the federal level, but I'm telling you, a state fight is a smarter, savvier, more productive, has better possibility of winning fight. So they put all of that together and they got it through in their state. And what happens when a bill like that can get passed in a state? That same group can go take a meeting in another state and get a state rep or a state senator in that state to sponsor the bill. And then that state rep or that state senator will go to the legal department in their state, get it adjusted so that it matches the Constitution of their state. And then they get a few other of their cronies to help sponsor the bill with them, and they get it passed on that floor. And they do that one state after another state after another state, so they don't have to fight at the federal level. And that when it comes time to fight it at the federal level, that's when the filibuster helps them. This is why they don't want the filibuster impacted, because the filibuster allows for states' rights. Sound familiar? We're going back to the Civil War now, but the same fights are still happening. It allows for states' rights to be the final conversation. Dems got to get as savvy, baby. We have to get as savvy. We have to learn that who writes policy. We march down on the streets and we're yelling at the mayor, and we don't realize the mayor does not write policy. City council does. We're yelling at the governor. That man does not write policy. State reps and state senators write policy. So while you're giving all your money for a presidential election and neglecting the state reps and the state senators, which is who you actually need to be friends with and make relationships with, we could just as equally and savvily put together a website, make a relationship with our, first of all, make a relationship with our state reps and our state senators, get involved in those races and help them, especially with the crazy gerrymandering happening here in Georgia, help them win and flip some of those state seats. Voting turnout across boards, Black, white, female, male, when it comes to localized elections is so low, it's embarrassing. When you juxtapose it against federal elections. It's embarrassing. So we got to run people in these seats locally. People we have access to, people we know, the really savvy lawyer that you're on the PTA with. And then we got to say, now, what kind of bill can we write to defeat CRT? And then they're going to say, we can write a boo-boo bill and we can get it passed, and I'll get it to legal to make sure it's savvy in this Constitution. And then you get that bill passed, and then on that same savvy website, you hunt the people in Virginia who agree with you, and you go down there and you take a meeting with them and you teach them about the bill and what you did, and then they get adjusted for their Constitution and get it passed. And then someone from Missouri comes down, takes a meeting with them, and see? And this is what conservatives do all the time. And they don't need millions and millions of lobbying dollars. I once heard someone say, poor people vote and rich people lobby. Mm. This is grassroots lobbying, which is what we have to start doing.
Well, and I want to say it was like, James Carville back in the Clinton days when Clinton was running for president. All politics is local. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think we get so obsessed with, because there's so much money in these races too. Everyone gets obsessed with the national politics, and then you get personally bogged down with seeing all of the ads, and then you tune out these little local elections because you're just quote unquote sick of all of it, and that's how these laws get passed almost until it's like too late.
And it's like people don't realize how much your local elections actually impact you way more than the federal level. I tell people all the time here in Atlanta, if you stand on the corner of Moreland and Memorial, if you're standing on one side of that street, you're in Fulton County. If you walk 5 steps, you're in DeKalb County. If you're standing on the Fulton side with the user's amount of marijuana and you get caught with it, you're getting a $50 citation because marijuana is decriminalized. It's not legal for personal use, but it's decriminalized in Fulton County. So you will get a $50 citation. You walk 5 steps and you're in DeKalb. And if the DeKalb police pick you up where marijuana is not decriminalized, you're going to jail. 5 steps is the difference between prison and a $50 citation. That is how much your local elections affect you.
Wow. So we have one from Melissa, who is joining us from Washington State. So thank you so very much for joining us this evening from across the country. And she says that she's interacted with you a few times on a page and started Allies for Social Justice. And she wanted to thank you for your work and your honesty and the opportunity to learn from you. She says she only recently came to understand the importance of being vocal and actively working against it instead of just saying, I'm against it. Mm-hmm. She says that she is angry with the reality that people of color deal with every day. And then the more she learns, the angrier she becomes. However, she promises to continue educating herself and sharing what she learns with others and do everything that she's able to do to fight with her time and her resources. And I think that's a good point too, that you bring up in the book about working on the community level and fighting and working with what you have instead of trying to go lofty and things like that. And you talk about a cleanup that you tried to organize that didn't go as well, but then you talk about your activism and your community organizing, and that it's what you have and what you can do. And I think, Tamika Mallory said this with her talk. It's like, I have a phone, I have a Twitter account, and, I have Facebook. I can start reaching people and communicating to people. If that's all the resources I have, that's still a resource that we can use to mobilize and to build a community as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people do things like their hobby is knitting, right? And so there's a woman, I follow her on TikTok. I absolutely love her. I wish I could remember her name so I could tell you guys. But she makes these beautiful, not knitting, crocheting. She makes these beautiful crocheted blankets. And every month she just takes them to the Goodwill. She doesn't do anything else with them. She sits and she crochets 2 or 3 blankets, a large one, some baby blankets, and all of that. And every week, at the end of the week, when she's done, she takes them down to the Goodwill. Well, the Goodwill sells the wares of what they do for their job education program. And people don't realize how good the Goodwill's job training, job education, job placement program is. I know a lot of people say, oh, I don't like to give to the Goodwill because they sell it. Well, they sell it to fund their job training program. What I was talking about, what happened with me at Tandem, is not what's happening there in Goodwill. They are helping people get trade education. They are helping people really get skills necessary to get jobs. They even have micro business startup loans for people who want to start a small business. So the through line of what her crocheted blankets is doing is helping someone get employed.
Well, we're almost at the top of the hour, and Ally dropped once again the order link for Little Shop of Stories in the chat if you all would like to order a copy of How We Can Win. Kimberly will be at Little Shop of Stories tomorrow signing those. So if you'd like to pick up a signed copy from them, you can do so by ordering that. And also remember that if you want it signed either to you or if you want to make it a gift to someone, to put that in the notes section, and we will take care of that tomorrow as well. Also, don't forget that it is very, very important, and we've said this since the pandemic began, to support our local independent bookstores who have done so much for the community, and of course, our Black-owned independent stores and businesses. Because we do need to build a more just society, and we need to offer them our patronage, just as we would offer any other independent bookstore or any other independent business our patronage as well. So, Kimberly, so we can end it on a positive and fun note this evening. And I happen to see, every once in a while I pay attention to that thing called Instagram. And I'm getting there. As you can see, I have a filing system back here, and it takes me a minute, but I'm like, oh no, I know where that is. And I flip through a couple pages and I find it and I write it down on a piece of paper and I take it somewhere. So I'm getting with the technology. It's going to be a hot minute. However, I did notice that you were doing something this weekend out in Bankhead. What are you doing? What's this new project of yours?
I'm so excited about this new project. So it's twofold, the project. One is a mural project to honor people, particularly Black men who have lost their life to violence. And so to honor them, we have started a mural project where we will be putting up one mural in honor to someone who was slain every month. The first one is going to the rapper Young Dolph, who was recently killed in Memphis. But it's simultaneously the event we're having this weekend where we put the mural, which the mural is gorgeous. I got to see it for the first time today. Oh my God, it's so beautiful. And it's special to me because Young Dolph was my cousin. So it's very special to me that he is the first mural. But where we put it at is Skate Park Atlanta, which is a skate park that we are building out in the community, in the middle of Bankhead, in a marginalized community, for the kids to have somewhere to go and skate and have fun. And it's like part of what I want to do is like recognize that, even though we are in this fight, we still have to find ways to bring marginalized people joy. and happiness and allow kids to be kids. And so I'm so happy to be on the board that's putting together this community skate park. And so to couple it this weekend with the first mural, because the murals will be all over the city in different places, but to couple it with the first mural and the Melanated Mural Project is just ideal. So I was like on live and I was a little verklempt because it's the first time we just got in all of the like, I'm not a skater, so I don't know the little things that people skate on, the thingies. We just got all of those in, and so the guys were putting those up, and the mural was finished, and we got to see the mural for the first time. But yeah, it's like part of this work is going to be bringing joy, not just back to Black communities, but to marginalized communities across the board, to poor communities. I'm a big fan of the Poor People's Movement. And it's just like, we have to recognize that like part of the trick in the game is to make us not see where we're connected. And I feel like the most powerful leaders that we have had in this lifetime were unifiers. And this is why they became dangerous to people, because unity really is where the power lies.
And I think that is a perfect spot to wrap up on. Kimberly, thank you so much, not only for your young adult books that you co-wrote with Geely, but of course also for this lovely piece of solo work that you've done. Once again, don't forget to shop your independent bookstores, reach out to members of the community, build allies, create unity, foster empathy, and don't forget that Black voices matter and Black lives matter. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We will post this video on YouTube, and don't forget to like and share once we do that. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating, and we will see you all again very, very soon.
Thank you, guys.